The clock in the Redemption Sheriff's office marked time with heavy, measured beats against the stillness. The sun hammered Main Street outside, turning the dust to brick-hard patches. A luckless tumbleweed pirouetted briefly before a gust devoured it. Brody Hayes observed this tableau from his desk, his gaze as fixed as the desert's glare. Redemption. An apt moniker, he mused. A haven for those seeking to outdistance their shadows, to slough off old lives and begin anew. A decade prior, he'd arrived, a mere echo of his former self, seeking precisely that. Peace eluded him, yet he discovered a certain tranquility, a solitude, often stifling, that beat the discord of his yesterdays. He was the law's embodiment here, the final barrier, the rampart against the encroaching darkness. Life was, for the most part, undemanding. Wrangling tipsy cowpokes, mediating squabbles over livestock, occasionally running down a two-bit thief. A far cry from what he once knew. Bertie leaned back, the chair groaning beneath him, its leather worn smooth with countless hours. His eyes, the color of gunmetal, swept the street. Mrs. Henderson brushed her shop's porch, her movements slow and deliberate. A pair of cowboys squabbled near the saloon, their voices a low rumble. Nothing stirred the ordinary. He reached for his coffee, the tepid brew acerbic against his palate. He'd brewed it ages ago, its allure long faded, but the habit grounded him. A small, reliable point in the sprawling emptiness of his routine. A fly droned in circles, drawn to the tang of stale coffee and aged paper. Brody watched, his thoughts drifting back to a life before the quiet. The wind screamed across the Texas expanse, stinging his face with sand. He was younger then, barely a man, yet his eyes held the same unwavering steel. A Texas Ranger, his badge, a symbol of justice, in a land often devoid of it. He and his partner, a weathered veteran named Jebediah, hunted a band of outlaws plaguing the border towns. They'd tracked them for weeks, sleeping under open skies, chewing on jerky, their bodies screaming in protest. "They won't get away with it, Brody," Jebediah had croaked, his voice raspy with dust. "We'll see justice done, one way or the other." Brody had nodded, his hand instinctively finding the grip of his Colt. He embraced justice then, defined as a clear right and wrong. He trusted in the law's power. They cornered the outlaws in a derelict ranch house. A savage gunfight erupted, the air thick with cordite and the cries of dying men. Brody fought with a controlled fury, his reflexes sharp and lethal. He watched Jebediah fall, a bullet tearing through his chest. A tidal wave of rage threatened to drown him. He killed them all, until the ranch house fell silent, heavy with the stench of death. He stood, amidst the carnage, his hands trembling, his body drenched in blood. He had delivered justice, in a fashion. But at what cost? Jebediah's words echoed. One way or the other. Had it been worth the price? He stared at his blood-soaked hands, questioning if he'd become the very monster he swore to destroy. Brody shook his head, dispelling the memory. An inescapable specter, a shadow that clung to him regardless of distance. He'd resigned from the Rangers soon after, unable to stomach the brutality, the unending cycle of bloodshed and vengeance. He craved something different. A place to atone, even if redemption was undeserved. His gaze swept the room. 4 walls, a desk, a chair, a cot tucked in the corner. The plain life. A solitary one. He lacked family, lacked companions, lacked anyone to share the weight. A lone figure, a sentinel guarding a town unaware of its proximity to the abyss. He'd attempted to connect, over time. Offering smiles at the diner, assisting neighbors, trying to integrate. But a wall remained. He saw it in their expressions. Respect, trust, but never true understanding. Perhaps that was for the best. He harbored too much darkness to burden others. The office door protested with a creak, snapping him back to the present. Deputy Johnson shuffled in, flushed from the heat. "Sheriff," he began, his voice hesitant. "We have a problem." Brody straightened, his senses sharpening. "Report." A stagecoach just arrived. There's a woman aboard, says she's looking for work. But something about her. Sheriff, she just doesn't feel right. Brody frowned. Strangers were commonplace in Redemption, but Johnson possessed keen instincts. If he detected trouble, it warranted attention. Her name? Brody asked, his voice steady, yet laced with authority. She calls herself Josie Lane. A jolt ran through Brody, a tremor he couldn't define. Josie Lane. The name held no familiarity, but the feeling it stirred did. A feeling of disquiet, of peril, of a gathering tempest. He rose, fixing Johnson with a sharp stare. Bring her in, deputy. I want a word. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that his quiet tenure in Redemption was about to end. The past had arrived, cloaked in the guise of Josie Lane, and the carefully constructed solitude was on the verge of collapse. Whether that was a damnation or the absolution he never believed he merited, remained to unfold. Dust and deceit, the sun hammered Redemption, turning Main Street's dust to powder that danced with each errant breeze. Brody Hayes occupied the sheriff's office porch, the aged planks groaning a complaint. A lone hawk spiraled above, its sharp gaze raking the arid land. For a decade, Redemption's tranquil cadence had smoothed the rough edges of his spirit, a far cry from the brutal tempest of his ranger years. Then, she materialized, a figure on horseback, mirage-like in the shimmering heat at the town's perimeter. The horse, a raven-coated mare, possessed effortless grace, muscles playing beneath its glossy hide. As the rider neared, Brody recognized a woman. Erect in the saddle, her bearing projected a confidence bordering on audacity. A broad-brimmed hat obscured her features, but even at a distance, Brody sensed the force of her stare. She drew rein before the general store, the mare exhaling softly, scattering dust. The woman dismounted with practiced ease, her movements hinting at a strength that belied her slender form. She secured the reins to the hitching post and turned to face the street. Brody felt a sudden shock, a primal response dormant for years. Her eyes, now visible under the hat's brim, were the hue of rich amber, threaded with gold. They carried a sorrow too vast for someone so young, yet flickered with palpable defiance. Her lips, full and slightly parted, suggested a smile that never quite met her gaze. She approached the sheriff's office, her boots tapping lightly on the boardwalk. Brody stood, every sense alert. Something about her felt askew, like an intricately designed mechanism with a hidden flaw. "Sheriff Hayes?" Her voice, low and resonant, carried a southern lilt. "That's me," Brody answered, his voice raspy with disuse. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, scrutinizing her. "I'm seeking lodging. I'd heard Redemption was accommodating." Brody arched a brow. "Accommodating, perhaps, but we also prize candor." He let the silence linger, gauging her reaction. She returned his stare without flinching. "And what gives you the impression I'm being dishonest, Sheriff?" "Something in your carriage, miss." He paused, inviting her to fill the gap. "Lane. Josie Lane. Miss Lane. You bear the air of someone fleeing something, or someone." A fleeting expression, fear? Recognition? Touched her features, vanishing before Brody could confirm it. "I assure you, Sheriff, I'm simply seeking a new beginning." "Redemption's ripe for such," Brody allowed, though he remained unconvinced. "Mrs. Abernathy runs the boarding house. Just down the street." He gestured with a nod. "Thank you, Sheriff." Josie Lane offered a brief nod and turned to go. Brody watched her depart, the gentle sway of her hips beneath her worn denim skirt catching his attention. He forced his gaze away, focusing on the dust devils swirling in the street. He couldn't dismiss the feeling that her arrival was more than chance. He retreated into the office, the aroma of aged leather and stale coffee assaulting his senses. He moved to his desk, a massive oak edifice that had been a fixture since Redemption's inception. He ran a hand over its satiny surface, feeling the indentations carved by years of use. He retrieved a well-worn leather journal and leafed through its pages, filled with accounts of minor offenses, drunken squabbles, and the occasional lost hound. He seized his pen, the nib scratching a path across the page as he inscribed, "Josie Lane arrives. Claims fresh start. Unlikely." He leaned back, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He knew he should disregard it, allow her to settle, demonstrate her integrity. Yet his instinct, honed by years tracking lawbreakers across the unforgiving Texas terrain, screamed a warning. Later that evening, as the sun relinquished its hold, painting the sky with vibrant strokes of orange and violet, Brody found himself positioned across from the boarding house. He rationalized it as a routine patrol, ensuring Redemption's tranquility, but he knew the truth. He was observing Josie Lane. He watched her emerge, clad in a simple cotton dress. She headed towards the saloon, her chin lifted. Brody felt a stab of something akin to protection, an emotion he hadn't felt in ages. He knew the caliber of men who frequented the saloon, the predators who would exploit a lone woman. He shadowed her, adhering to the shadows, his senses acutely tuned. He witnessed her enter the saloon, the boisterous din spilling out into the night. He lingered outside, listening, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. After what seemed an eternity, she emerged, her cheeks flushed, her eyes gleaming with heightened intensity. She hurried back towards the boarding house, her steps faltering slightly. Brody stepped from the darkness, blocking her path. "Miss Lane," he said, his voice hushed. "A word." She halted, startled. "Sheriff, you gave me a fright. I observed you in the saloon. I was merely having a drink. Alone?" She hesitated. "I met some gentlemen. I surmise you did." Brody's tone held a note of censure. "Redemption can be a treacherous place for a woman unescorted, Miss Lane. I am capable of handling myself, Sheriff." Her voice was sharp, defensive. "I trust you are," Brody responded, his gaze unwavering, "because I won't perpetually be present to watch your back." He moved aside, permitting her to pass. As she walked away, he noticed something previously unseen, a subtle, almost imperceptible limp in her stride. An old injury, perhaps, or something more recent. He watched her vanish inside the boarding house, the door closing soundlessly behind her. He stood there a long moment, the crisp night air raising gooseflesh on his skin. He knew, with a conviction that settled deep within him, that Josie Lane spelled trouble. But he also knew he couldn't distance himself. The past that haunted him, the redemption he craved, was about to become inextricably bound to the secrets she harbored. And that realization, more than anything, filled him with dread. The seamstress's charmed sunbeams, thick with floating particles, illuminated Josie Lane as she maneuvered cumbersome fabric bales into the aged mercantile. The structure, dormant since Hemlock's passing, creaked a lament beneath the weight of her aspirations. This town, she mused, would find its rebirth through her needle. Days of relentless scrubbing had purged layers of ingrained dirt, the sharp tang of cleanser battling the stagnant air of years gone by. Now, aided by a few intrigued townsfolk, the space was evolving into something inviting. Vibrant calicos were neatly arranged on shelving fashioned by a surprisingly capable young Caleb, and the staccato beat of her sewing machine resonated through the near-silent Main Street. Humming softly, Josie meticulously arranged a window display, a show-stopping gown of brilliant jade silk, a labor of love completed during her journey to redemption. It was an audacious piece, a sharp departure from the community's typical, muted attire. A small placard declared, "Josie's Custom Creations." Before midday, her first customer arrived, Martha, the baker, known for her reserve. Martha's eyes widened, taking in the revitalized space. "It's exquisite," she whispered, her rough hand gently tracing the smooth fabric. "I never imagined seeing something like this in redemption." Josie's smile was genuine, radiating warmth. "I want to bring a little beauty to the everyday," she replied. "What can I create for you, Martha?" Word traveled with the speed of prairie fire. Soon, the mercantile buzzed with women, their faces animated with curiosity and admiration. They extolled the fabric's textures, the detailed needlework, the refined designs. Josie listened intently to their wishes, sketching concepts and offering advice, her fingers already itching to translate their visions into reality. Across the thoroughfare, Sheriff Brody Hayes observed the activity from his office window. The constant stream of townsfolk entering Josie's establishment was impossible to disregard. He rationalized his scrutiny as a matter of maintaining order. Yet, he couldn't deny the compelling force that drew his attention. Her guarded nature intrigued him, the trace of sorrow in her gaze tugging at a dormant part of himself. He told himself vigilance was his duty, unearthing any potential secrets. But a long-suppressed voice whispered of something deeper. He'd witnessed fleeting moments of mirth as she engaged with her patrons, a luminous quality that contrasted sharply with her reserved demeanor around him. He found himself craving to elicit that joy, to witness her unburdened happiness. Then Eli Miller, the town's walking archive and source of both wisdom and gossip, ambled into the sheriff's office, eyes twinkling with mischief. "That seamstress is certainly ruffling some feathers," he observed, easing into the creaky chair across from Brody's desk. Brody grunted, attempting disinterest. "Just keeping tabs, Eli." Eli chuckled knowingly. "Of course, Sheriff, of course. Although, I suspect your tabs are focused on something a tad more specific than general goings-on." Brody shifted uncomfortably. "What's that supposed to imply?" "Oh, nothing," Eli responded innocently, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Merely observing, much like yourself, though our motivations may diverge somewhat." He paused, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "You know, Brody, a man can't spend his entire life outrunning ghosts. Sooner or later, he has to stand and face them, or they'll forever haunt him." Brody bristled. "I haven't the faintest idea what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Eli arched an eyebrow. "That woman harbors secrets, clear as a mountain spring. But so do you, Sheriff. So do you." He rose, dusting off his trousers. "Just remember, son, the greatest rewards often come with the greatest risks. And sometimes, the safest roads lead to nowhere at all. Why?" He departed, leaving Brody staring out the window, his mind besieged by conflicting emotions. Eli's words resonated, a stark reminder of the defenses he had erected, the past he persistently avoided. He knew Eli was right. Josie Lane represented a risk, a disruption he didn't need. Yet, the prospect of abandoning her to her fate, of allowing her to face her struggles alone, felt like a betrayal of his core values. As twilight descended, painting the heavens in vibrant hues, Brody found himself inexplicably drawn to Josie's mercantile. The windows pulsed with inviting light, casting elongated shadows onto the tranquil street. He wavered, his hands suspended inches from the doorknob. He could retreat, disavow the pull, suppress the yearning for something beyond the quiet isolation he'd grown accustomed to. He could immerse himself in his duties, prioritizing the safety of redemption, and ignore the persistent sensation that he was missing something essential. But he couldn't. With a steadying breath, he pushed the door inward. The mingled scents of fabric and lavender enveloped him, a reassuring aroma that eased the rigidity in his shoulders. Josie stood behind the counter, meticulously arranging a length of lace. Her gaze lifted, a flicker of surprise registering as she recognized him. "Sheriff," she greeted, her voice a gentle cadence. "What brings you here?" He stood mute, grappling for the right words. He hadn't formulated a plan, a plausible explanation. He'd simply obeyed his instincts, his heart charting the course. He began, faltering, searching for the appropriate phrase. "I simply wanted to see how you were faring." Josie's countenance softened. "I'm settling in well, Sheriff. The town has been exceedingly welcoming." "Good," he managed, the words sounding clumsy even to his ears. He scanned the shop, absorbing the kaleidoscope of textiles, the intricate details. "You've transformed this space beautifully." "Thank you," she replied, a subtle smile gracing her lips. "It demanded considerable effort, but it's been worth it." A silence descended, pregnant with unspoken sentiments. Brody felt a familiar apprehension rising in his chest. He was out of his element, navigating uncharted emotional terrain. He cleared his throat. "Well, I should be going. Just wanted to ensure everything was satisfactory." He turned to depart, But Josie halted him. "Sheriff," she said softly, scarcely above a whisper. "Thank you." He pivoted, his eyes meeting hers. "For what?" For everything. For not driving me out of town. For extending me a chance." He scrutinized her features, searching for any hint of artifice. But he discerned only gratitude, and something more. A reflection of the yearning within his own soul. "You earned it," he responded, his voice husky with suppressed emotion. He exited the shop, the cool night air a welcome balm against his flushed face. He retraced his steps to his office, his mind in turmoil. He understood he was engaging in a precarious game, allowing himself to develop feelings for Josie Lane. But he couldn't deny the conviction that she was worth the risk. Seated at his desk, gazing out at the darkened street, he reached a decision. He would safeguard her, irrespective of the cost. He would uncover her secrets, not to condemn, but to comprehend. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would finally discover a path to redeem himself, not merely as a sheriff, but as a man. Stolen moments, the delicate fragrance of lavender, uniquely infused with Josie's essence, lingered after her departure from the diner. Brody, framed by the window, followed her progress across the street, the subtle undulation of her skirt hinting at possibilities. He abandoned his half-finished apple pie. Paperwork threatened to avalanche from his desk, but the potential range war simmered between the northern ranchers, and a litany of sensible reasons screamed at him to avoid Josie Lane. But sense felt like a distant country these days. That evening, he inexplicably found himself before her establishment. Lanes, Linens, Lovelies. The sign proclaimed in softly glowing letters against the gathering dusk. It wasn't a conscious decision. His legs, it seemed, operated on their own agenda. The chime above the entrance announced his arrival. Josie was engrossed in a sketch at a sprawling table, her brow creased in concentration. A lone lamp cast a honeyed light, creating elongated, dancing shadows across the reams of fabric that hugged the walls. "Sheriff," she greeted him, surprise blossoming into a smile. "What brings you here?" "Just checking in," he mumbled, instantly regretting the weak pretext. "Ensuring everything's in order." Amusement danced in Josie's eyes as she leaned back. "Perfectly so, Sheriff. Unless you suspect a thread larceny or a cotton conspiracy." A chuckle escaped him, a sound he hadn't realized had grown so unfamiliar. Something of that nature. He paused, then took the plunge. "I was wondering perhaps he'd be interested in an evening stroll. The sky is remarkably clear." Her smile softened, becoming almost tender. "I would enjoy that very much." They ambled along the town's periphery, the dirt road yielding softly beneath their boots. The air, sharp and invigorating, carried whispers of pine and damp soil. Overhead, a cosmic tapestry unfolded, an infinite scattering of starlight upon a dark canvas. "It's breathtaking," Josie breathed, her gaze lifted toward the heavens. "It is," Brody murmured, his eyes fixed on her. The starlight painted the delicate slope of her cheek, catching the ebony strands of her hair in silver threads. They walked in companionable quiet, punctuated only by the trilling of crickets and a distant coyote's lament. Finally, Brody broke the silence. "You've settled in well," he remarked. "The town seems charmed by you." "They're good-hearted people," Josie replied softly. "They deserve a touch of beauty. Do you foresee a future here?" The question hung between them, pregnant with unspoken anxieties. Josie's smile waned. "I honestly don't know," she confessed. "I want to. But to AI." Her voice trailed off, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He refrained from pressing her. He sensed hidden depths, and knew forcing the issue would only push her further into herself. He also knew inaction wasn't an option. The following day found Brody assembling a picnic basket, an activity foreign to him for years, evoking a sense of disquieting, yet exhilarating novelty. He filled it with thinly sliced ham, cheese, crusty bread, and a jar of homemade pickles, carefully selected from Mrs. Henderson's emporium. He even included a bottle of sparkling cider, remembering Josie's remark about commemorating small victories. He found her at her shop, humming softly as she assembled a vibrant patchwork quilt. "Afternoon, Sheriff," she greeted him, her eyes widening in surprise. "Afternoon," he replied, feeling an unexpected warmth on his cheeks. "I thought you might appreciate a respite. I've prepared a picnic." Her surprise deepened, replaced by a blend of delight and curiosity. "A picnic? By the river," he elaborated, gesturing toward the woven basket. "If your schedule permits." "My schedule always permits a picnic," she declared, her face radiating genuine pleasure. They discovered a secluded haven beside the Redemption River, a verdant bank embraced by the weeping branches of a willow. The water chuckled as it traversed the smooth stones, composing a soothing serenade. They unfurled their blanket and unwrapped the contents of the basket, the savory aromas mingling with the clean scent of the riverbank. They ate in comfortable tranquility, interspersed with fleeting smiles and shared glances. "This is lovely," Josie ventured, her voice a soft murmur. "Thank you." "My pleasure entirely," Brody replied, his sentiment sincere. He felt more at ease than he had in ages, the persistent tension that plagued him dissolving with each passing moment. As their meal concluded, the conversation became more intimate. "You seem haunted," Josie observed, her gaze probing. "As if you bear the weight of the world." Brody hesitated. He rarely revisited his past, the memories still tender and painful. But something about Josie invited him to confide, to share the burden he had carried for so long. "I used to be a ranger," he began, his voice hushed, "down on the border." He recounted the endless patrols, the ever-present threat of violence, the faces of the men he had lost. He spoke of the decision he'd been forced to make, the decision that had cost him his career and left lasting scars. "I left," he concluded, his voice barely audible. "Came here, seeking peace." Josie reached for his hand, her touch gentle and consoling. "I understand," she said. "I know what it's like to outrun one's history." He met her gaze, his eyes searching. "What are you running from, Josie?" She hesitated, then drew a deep breath. "Josie Lane isn't my real name," she confessed. "It's Isabella Rossi." She unveiled her past in Chicago, her family, the man she had loved and lost. She recounted her mistakes, her regrets, the reasons she had fled and reinvented herself in redemption. "I was young and impetuous," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I made poor choices, associated with the wrong crowd. I simply wanted to escape, to begin anew." Brody listened attentively, his heart aching for her. He witnessed the anguish in her eyes, the fear that still gripped her. He knew that whatever pursued her was dangerous, and that eventually he would find her. "You can't perpetually flee, Isabella," he said gently. "Ultimately, you must confront your past." "I know," she whispered, barely audible, "but I'm terrified." He squeezed her hand in reassurance. "I'll be here," he vowed. "I'll assist you." As the sun descended, casting elongated shadows across the water, they repacked the picnic basket. The air had turned cooler, and a soft breeze rustled through the leaves of the willow. They returned to town in silence, their hands occasionally brushing. Brody felt an upwelling of protectiveness towards Josie, an urge to shield her from the dangers looming on the horizon. He understood that entanglement with her was perilous, potentially jeopardizing everything he had diligently constructed. Yet, he found himself powerless to resist. He was drawn to her essence, her strength, her fragility, her indomitable spirit. Reaching her shop, Josie turned to face him, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Brody," she said, "for listening, for understanding." He returned her smile, a genuine expression that illuminated his face. "Any time, Isabella." He lingered as she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the bell above the entrance tinkling softly. He remained there for a moment, his gaze lingering on the closed portal, before turning and heading back toward his office. He anticipated the coming storm, the inevitable arrival of Josie's past. But he also knew he would be prepared. He would safeguard her, regardless of the cost. A shadow of doubt, the slam of the screen door reverberated through the sheriff's office, yanking Brody from the mire of paperwork that had become an indistinguishable mess. Deputy Ben Carter filled the doorway, his normally cheerful countenance clouded with an uncharacteristic gravity. A crumpled paper was clutched in his grip. "Sheriff, you gotta see this," Ben stated, his voice strained. Brody leaned back, the complaint of his chair's worn springs a familiar sound. "Trouble, Ben? Widow Gable's felines scaled the oak again?" Ben shook his head, stepping inside. The scent of sun-baked dust mingled with the ever-present undertone of stale coffee. He laid the paper on Brody's desk, smoothing it with a palm. "A wanted notice." "Stage brought it this morning," Ben explained. "Post office drop-off, but Abernathy brought it straight over, said it reeked of importance." Brody lifted the poster, eyes snagging on the bold lettering. "Wanted for questioning Isabella Rossi." Beneath was a blurred photograph, seemingly copied ad infinitum. The woman pictured had dark hair pulled severely back, highlighting sharp cheekbones and a resolute jaw. Even through the poor quality, her eyes blazed with a familiar intensity. A cold dread coiled in Brody's stomach. He recognized that face. "Says she's wanted in Chicago," Ben continued, oblivious to Brody's inner turmoil, "for questioning regarding organized crime." He stammered, glancing briefly at Brody. "Says she might use another name." Brody's mind raced as he absorbed the poster. Isabella Rossi. Josie Lane. Two names, one face that plagued his waking moments. A face that had begun to etch itself into his calloused heart. He rubbed a hand over his bristled jaw, the rough scrape a grounding sensation. "Where'd this originate, Ben?" Brody asked, carefully leveling his voice. "Chicago. Sheriff in Willow Creek got it first. Figured she might have come west. Sent copies down the line." Willow Creek was a single day's journey. Close. Too damn close. Brody scrutinized the poster, seeking flaws. Any excuse for dismissal. The set of her features, the arch of an eyebrow, the subtle tilt of her head. It was Josie. Or Isabella. Whatever her true identity, the woman depicted was undeniably her. He recalled the curated anecdotes she'd shared. Fragments of a life lived elsewhere, carefully excised of danger. The flinch at his touch, the haunted glimmer in her eyes when unguarded, it coalesced into a damning picture. "What's the play, Sheriff?" Ben asked, his eagerness palpable. "Do we bring her in?" Brody remained silent, locked in internal conflict, duty warring with something he couldn't articulate. Protection? Yearning? A nascent love? He refused to accept it. The law was clear, his duty absolute. Apprehension should be automatic. But staring at the poster again, he saw not a hardened criminal, but a trapped creature, desperate and terrified. A feeling he knew intimately. He pondered her laughter, the way she met his gaze across the diner, the tentative warmth of her hand in his that night by the creek. Had it all been artifice? Had he been a fool, played for a mark? "Sheriff?" Ben prodded, bewildered. Brody exhaled, a ragged expulsion of air. But choice loomed. One capable of unraveling the fragile peace he'd cultivated in redemption, one that could ruin him entirely. "Ben," he finally uttered, his voice rough. "I need a favor, big one, but you can't breathe a word to anyone. Understood?" Ben straightened, eyes widening with anticipation. "Course, Sheriff. Anything. Ride out to the Lazy J, find Josie Lane, warn her, tell her trouble's brewing. Advise caution." Then frowned, confused. "But Sheriff, if she's wanted, just do it, Ben," Brody snapped, sharper than intended. "No questions, just go." Ben didn't argue. He snatched his hat and bolted, leaving Brody alone with the damning poster and the tempest gathering within him. He reclaimed the poster, tracing her face. Isabella Rossi. A name evocative of clandestine meetings and veiled threats. A world removed from the tranquility she seemed to be forging in redemption. He crushed the poster, the paper giving way in his fist. He knew he trod a precarious path, blurring the lines of right and wrong. He risked his livelihood, his standing, everything he'd built. But he couldn't shake the conviction that a deeper narrative lay hidden beneath the surface. He refused to condemn her without knowing the truth. He moved to the window, gazing upon the sun-baked street. The sun dipped, painting long shadows across the town. A creeping tendril of doubt wormed into his consciousness. Was he a fool, blinded by delusion? He didn't know, but he had to discover the truth. And he knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that whatever fate awaited, redemption stood on the precipice. And so did he. Confessions and secrets. The bell above Josie's mercantile chimed, its cheerful peal a stark discord against the turmoil raging in Brody. He widened the door's opening, a rush of lavender and spice enveloping him like a shroud. Josie stood behind the counter, coaxing brightly hued yarn into an artful display. Her hands danced with practiced ease, a sharp contrast to the knot of anxiety tightening his gut. She glanced up, her face blossoming into a smile that withered at the sight of his grim visage. The usual warmth in her gaze flickered, replaced by something unreadable, perhaps a tremor of dread. "Brody, what's wrong?" Her voice, usually bright, was hushed, edged with concern. He crossed the wooden floor, each footfall a deliberate thud. He halted a short distance away, needing the buffer. Closeness felt dangerous, premature. Not until he had answers. "We need to talk," he stated, his voice even, controlled. He maintained a detached tone, but the gravity pressed between them like a physical weight. She'd swallowed hard, her eyes flitting around the cozy shop as if searching for an exit. "All right," she breathed, barely audible. "What is it?" Reaching inside his jacket, Brony produced the crumpled wanted flyer. He flattened it on the polished wood, the stark monochrome image of Isabella Rossi glaring up at them. The silence deepened, thick and smothering, broken only by the measured cadence of a grandfather clock ticking in the periphery. Josie didn't reach for the incriminating paper. She offered no denial. She merely stared, her complexion leaching of its color. The effervescent vitality that defined her seemed to drain away, leaving her muted. "Isabella Rossi," Brody confirmed, stating the stark truth. "That's who you are, isn't it?" A single tear tracked a lonely course down her cheek. Finally, she met his gaze, her eyes pools of sorrow that resonated with a deep ache within him. "It was," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It is, but I haven't been her for what feels like a lifetime." He leaned against the counter, struggling to reconcile the woman he cherished with the ghostly image on the paper. "Chicago PD wants a word with you regarding organized crime." She winced, as if physically struck. "They suspect my involvement," she choked out, her voice cracking. "But I wasn't. Not truly." "Tell me everything, Josie," he urged, softening his tone. He needed to comprehend. To know if the woman who'd captured his heart was capable of the deeds hinted at in that damning document. She drew a shuddering breath, her hands trembling as she wrung them. "My brother Marco. He was embroiled. Deeply." Bertie recognized the name instantly. Marco Rossi. A known strong arm, a rising star in the Chicago outfit, vanished without a trace a couple of years prior. Presumed deceased. "He was everything to me," Josie continued, her voice catching. "Our parents died when I was just a child. Marco raised me, shielded me. He drifted into bad company to provide for us, to give me opportunities. And you were aware?" I suspected the truth," she admitted, her voice small. "I saw the influx of cash, the clandestine hours, the wary glances over his shoulder, but I resisted knowing. I was young, blind. I reasoned he was simply successful in his endeavors." When did the veil drop? "When the violence materialized," she uttered, barely a breath. "When I witnessed his capacity for brutality. I pleaded with him to quit, to escape. But he stubbornly refused. He claimed he was in too deep, trapped in a web of obligation." She trailed off, taking another unsteadying breath. Then things took a calamitous turn. There was a contract. Someone was murdered. The authorities commenced their investigations. Marco panicked completely. He demanded I disappear, gave me startup money and a fabricated identity. He insisted it was the only way to shield me. "And you landed here?" She nodded slowly. "I chose redemption because it felt remote. A sanctuary. I desperately wanted a fresh start, to bury that former existence. I craved to be Josie Lane, not Isabella Rossi." I aspired to goodness. Brody scrutinized her face, searching for a glimmer of deceit, but he witnessed only raw anguish, a desperate appeal for understanding and forgiveness. He inclined towards belief. A desperate yearning gripped him to obey. Trust her. Why keep this from me? He inquired, the question tinged with hurt. She averted her gaze, shame flooding her features. I was petrified, she confessed. Terrified of your judgment. Terrified you'd deliver me to the authorities. Terrified you'd sever any connection if you glimpsed the darkness of my past. Josie, he began, reaching out to gently tilt her face towards him. You must believe that I would never. He faltered, incapable of completing the sentence. He remained unsure what he would never do. A conflict raged within, torn between his sworn duty to the law and the burgeoning affection he harbored for the woman before him. Marco is believed to be dead, Brody stated, reverting to the known details. But the Chicago PD evidently doesn't accept your innocence. They believe you acted as an accomplice. I didn't, she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. I swear to you, Brody, I never harmed a soul. I never abetted in any of his transgressions. I only desperately wished for him to detach himself from that life. Exactly what role did Marco play? Brody pressed, needing to comprehend the scope of her brother's illicit activities and, consequently, the immensity of the peril Josie had fled and perhaps, unknowingly, brought with her. She hesitated, her eyes shimmering with a blend of fear and remorse. He functioned as an enforcer. He collected unpaid debts, intimidated rival gangs. He executed the outfit's directives, no matter how vile. The pieces clicked into place, constructing a distressing portrait of Josie's history. She had languished in the shadows of a perilous man, a man who had dragged her perilously close to a milieu of brutality and illegality. And the contract killing? Brody probed, bracing himself for her admission. The inciting incident that forced your flight? Josie squeezed her eyes shut, a new torrent of tears coursing down her pale cheeks. It was a rival kingpin, she whispered, her voice fragile. Marco Air received orders to eliminate him. I am unaware of the precise specifics. I merely realized that, in its aftermath, everything fractured. The police presence intensified. Marco lived in constant trepidation. That's when he directed me to leave everything behind. Brody advanced, cupping her cheek with a gentle hand. You are safe here, Josie, he stated, his voice resolute. I shall not allow anything to befall you. He recognized the impossibility of the promise. He knew that protecting Josie would place him in opposition to his colleagues, to his ethics. But he could not abandon her. Not after hearing the truth. He embraced her, enfolding her in his arms as she wept against his chest. The familiar perfume of lavender and cinnamon filled his senses, a small beacon of solace amidst the tempest. The future loomed uncertain, but his conviction remained. He would exhaust every resource to safeguard Josie Lane, even at the forfeiture of everything he held dear. The tranquility of redemption, his career, potentially even his life. Because somehow, between suspicion and certainty, she had evolved into more than merely a woman burdened by a shadowy past. She had become his future. The weight of the badge, the fluorescent lights in the sheriff's office whined, a grating counterpoint to the muted unease swirling within Brody. His gaze fell to the tarnished star on his chest, the metal a cold brand against his skin. Tonight, it felt like an anchor, the responsibility it represented pressing down on him with uncomfortable force. The oath he'd taken, the vow to protect and serve, now seemed to clash with the impulse to safeguard Josie Isabella Rossi. He pushed away from the desk, the chair squealing a mournful protest. The room, cramped and redolent of stale coffee and aging paperwork, felt stifling. Outside, redemption slumbered, oblivious to the turmoil gripping its protector. He sought the window, the dust-filmed glass offering a blurred vista of the darkened Main Street. The saloon across the way, dark and silent, cast an ethereal glow from its defunct neon sign. Reflected back at him was a weary face, etched with lines carved by regret and experience. The reckless ranger was a ghost of the past. Or was he, buried beneath layers of duty and a carefully constructed calm, Josie possessed the unnerving ability to exhume what he believed, long interred. He recalled her confession, the stark terror in her eyes, the quaver in her voice as she spoke of her brother's deeds. He hadn't seen a hardened criminal, but a frightened woman ensnared in a treacherous web. Could he stand idly by and watch her be dragged back into that mire? Condemn her, based solely on a faded poster and rumors whispered from a distant city? He closed his eyes, Josie's image seared onto his mind's eye. He remembered her hopeful yet apprehensive gaze, the delicate strength of her hand in his, the way his pulse had quickened at her genuine radiant smile. He opened them, resolve hardening his features. He wouldn't condemn her outright. He needed to uncover the truth, to delve deeper, to unearth something, anything that would either validate her innocence or seal her fate. He owed her that much. He owed it to himself. He returned to his desk, the weight of the badge now less a burden of office, more the somber realization of another's life resting within his hands. He retrieved the wanted poster, Isabella Rossi's stark image, a silent accusation. He scrutinized her face, seeking any flicker of the woman he knew. He found scant resemblance, a mere whisper of the vulnerability she fought so fiercely to conceal. Information was paramount, and it was needed urgently. He couldn't trust local resources, not with Josie's future hanging in the balance. He needed a reliable contact, someone familiar with Chicago's underbelly, someone discreet. He reached for the phone, his fingers hesitating above the worn keys. It had been years since he'd spoken to Marco, not since he'd abandoned the Rangers for the quiet refuge of redemption. Their departure had been fraught with conflicted emotions, regret, understanding, unspoken promises. But Marco was reliable, fiercely loyal. He punched in the familiar sequence, his heart hammering against his ribs. Each ring felt interminable, the silence on the other end amplifying his anxiety. He almost severed the connection, half convinced Marco had moved on, severed ties with that former life. Then, a voice, raspy and world-weary, rasped through the receiver. "Yeah? Marco, it's Brody." A pause. A long, drawn-out silence. "Brody? Damn, thought you were pushing up daisies." "Not yet," Brody replied, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Listen, I need a favor." "A favor? After all this time? What makes you think I'm inclined to assist? We pulled each other from the fire more times than I can count, Marco. Surely that counts for something." Another pause, briefer this time. "What do you require?" Brody inhaled deeply. "Information. I need you to delve into something, unofficially." "Unofficially, eh? Sounds delicate." "It is." Brody hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "It concerns a woman. She's in difficulty." "A woman?" Brody Hayes, the taciturn lawman, embroiled with a dame? "This I have to hear." "There's no room for stories, Marco. I need your help. This woman, she's connected to the Rossi family in Chicago." He heard Marco take a sharp breath on the other end. "The Rossi family? You're playing with dynamite, Brody. I realize that, which is why I need you. I need you to find out everything you can about Isabella Rossi. Ascertain if the charges against her hold water." "Isabella Rossi. I'll see what I can unearth. But this will come at a price, old friend. Name it. Once this concludes, I require a bottle of the finest whiskey west of the Mississippi and a damn compelling narrative. Agreed, ah?" Brody paused. "Marco, thanks. Hold your gratitude. This could turn very unpleasant. If she's tangled up with the Rossi outfit, she's in dire straits." "Chess. I know. Just uncover the facts." "I will. Give me a few days." And Brody tread carefully. "You too, Marco." Brody replaced the receiver, the dial tone echoing in his ear. There was no turning back. He'd blurred the lines, compromised the separation between his duty and his emotions. He had no way of knowing where this course would lead, but retreat was no longer an option. He had a premonition that this was merely the opening act. The weight of the badge felt less official, and something more personal now. A serpent in town, a dust devil, a miniature tornado of grit, pirouetted down Main Street, mirroring the disquiet that festered in Redemption's air as a black sedan slipped into town. It was a Cadillac, its polished surface reflecting the merciless sun like obsidian glass, an extravagant anomaly amidst the familiar workaday vehicles. Silas Blackwood emerged, his movements crisp and controlled. He presented a similar paradox, a flawlessly tailored suit in charcoal, utterly incongruous here, offset by eyes like frozen coal, hinting at the brutality lurking behind the sartorial elegance. He adjusted a cufflink, a fleeting spark of gold. Redemption, he breathed, the word a bitter tang on his palate. His gaze swept the locale, at once known and foreign. The mercantile, the tavern with its beckoning doors, the courthouse, all bathed in bleached hues of sun-faded paint. A subtle twist of his lips betrayed his disdain. Small-town existence. Distant from his world. Vulnerable. He strode with deliberate slowness toward the saloon, the only place promising a modicum of privacy. The doors groaned open, throwing him into temporary shadow. The ambiance was redolent with flat beer, sawdust, and a whiff of something floral, likely Josie's signature scent. A scattering of locals paused in their conversations, their eyes drawn to the newcomer. Blackwood ignored them, already searching the recesses of the room. Josie was absent. Disappointment, a quick jab, surprised him, but he wasn't here to socialize. He was here to scrutinize, to evaluate, to strategize. He took a seat at the bar, the leather cool against his skin. The bartender, sporting a walrus mustache and a world-weary mien, approached. "What'll it be, friend?" "Whiskey," Silas rumbled, his voice a low thrum. Straight. As the drink was poured, Silas subtly appraised the space. Nothing noteworthy, merely the usual assortment of provincial faces, etched with tedium and toil. Except a twitch of movement near the window. An elderly man, perched on a stool by the entrance, observing him with guarded eyes. Silas savored his whiskey, the fiery liquid a welcome sensation. He locked gazes with the old man, a ghost of amusement on his lips. The man held his ground, yet Silas detected a flicker of anxiety behind the weathered countenance. Good. Let them be apprehensive. Let them understand the paradigm had shifted. Josie was at the diner, methodically cleaning the counter. The lunchtime crowd had dispersed, leaving only the gentle thrum of the fridge and the muffled clatter from the kitchen. She struggled to focus on the road task, but her thoughts were a tempest of worries. Brody's probe, her siblings' potential actions, and now, the irksome sense of being watched. She scanned Main Street, her eyes flitting over the scene. All seemed normal. The customary afternoon quiet, the gentle rustle of leaves, an occasional vehicle cruising by. Yet the feeling persisted, a glacial touch on her nape. She shook her head, dismissing it as paranoia. She'd been teetering on edge for so long that gauging genuine threats from fanciful anxieties was difficult. Regardless, she couldn't evict the feeling that peril was drawing nearer. Outside, Silas Blackwood sat in his car, parked just off Main Street. With binoculars, he watched Josie. The lenses sharpened her features, her gait, the delicate angle of her jaw, the underlying sadness haunting her gaze. A surprising twinge of empathy struck him. She was a mere figure in a greater plot, a victim of her brother's hubris. But empathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. He lowered the binoculars, his face hardening. He had obligations, and sentimentality had no place. He ignited the engine, the potent motor purring to life. It was time to make his presence palpable. Eli Miller, on his usual perch outside the general store, observed the black Cadillac depart. He'd noted Silas Blackwood's arrival earlier, and something about the man had grated on him. His bearing, the glacial eyes, the costly attire that telegraphed outsider. Eli had resided in redemption his entire existence, knowing every countenance, every narrative, every buried secret. He sensed when someone didn't belong. Silas Blackwood was an alien presence. He watched the Cadillac disappear down the road, his brow furrowed in thought. He couldn't surmise Blackwood's purpose, but it felt sinister. Anything that menaced redemption, menaced Josie. Eli might be a local gossip, but he was also fiercely protective of his town and its inhabitants. He levered himself up, his joints protesting. Time to confer with Sheriff Hayes. Brody was in his office, absorbed in the data Marco had sent. A convoluted network of individuals, dates, and associations, all pointing back to the Rossi Syndicate and their extensive criminal web. Josie's brother Michael was deeply entangled, dangerously so. The more Brody uncovered, the more precarious Josie's situation appeared. A rap at the door disrupted his concentration. Eli Miller shuffled in, his face a map of worry. "Sheriff," he croaked, "we got a viper in town." Brody leaned back, his expression impassive. "What's this about, Eli? Fella arrived earlier? Driving a flashy black Cadillac. Name's likely bogus, but he reeks of trouble. Been loitering at the saloon." Observing Josie, Brody's stomach clenched. "Did he speak to anyone? Did you overhear anything?" "Not much," Eli said, shaking his head. "Just watching. And I'm telling you, Sheriff, his look could curdle milk. His intentions are foul. I feel it in my bones." Brody stood, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. "Thanks, Eli. I appreciate the warning." Eli nodded, his eyes troubled. "Just exercise caution, Sheriff. And keep an eye on Josie. She's suffered enough." Brody watched Eli depart, his thoughts churning. A serpent indeed. And Brody was certain, with a bone-deep conviction, that the serpent had come for Josie. His phone chimed, displaying Marco's name. "Hayes," he answered. "I have intel," Marco said, his voice taut with tension. "Blackwood. Silas Blackwood. He's Rossi's enforcer. A true predator. Josie is in grave danger, Brody. The price of silence." The little bell above the door to Josie's shop, "Fines," gave a merry jingle, a stark contrast to the dread coiling in her gut. She glanced up from polishing a delicate teacup, her breath snagging. Silas Blackwood dominated the entrance, his bespoke suit an alien presence amidst the thrift store chic. His gaze, sharp and predatory, swept the cluttered space, lingering briefly on a silver locket before settling on her. "Ms. Lane," he purred, his voice velvety yet laced with an undercurrent of steel that made her skin prickle. "Or should I say Miss Rossi?" Josie managed a wan smile, her fingers fumbling as she replaced the teacup. "Ms. Lane suits me fine, Mr. Blackwood. Silas Blackwood. I represent a family interests." He stepped inside, and the already cramped shop felt claustrophobic. The musty scent of aged paper and beeswax wrestled with the sharp tang of his expensive cologne, creating a heavy, unsettling blend. "I'm not aware of any family involved in antiques, Mr. Blackwood," Josie countered, her voice betraying none of the panic clawing at her insides. She edged behind the counter, using it as a precarious barrier. Blackwood's lips stretched into a mirthless smile. "Family connections can be multifaceted, Miss Lane. Holdings in various ventures." He paused, letting the insinuation sink in. "Certain investments, perhaps. Underperforming ones." Josie pretended to straighten a rack of vintage postcards, avoiding his gaze. "I'm afraid I'm at a loss." "Spare me the pretense, Josie," Blackwood snapped, his tone hardening. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the counter, knuckles gleaming white against the worn wood. "We both know the score. The money. Where is it?" Josie swallowed hard, the unspoken question hanging between them like a drawn blade. She couldn't bluff her way out of this. Not with him. "I don't have it," she stated, meeting his piercing stare. "I told you, I never took it." A low, grating chuckle escaped Blackwood's lips. "You expect me to swallow that? You, disappearing in the dead of night mere hours after your uncle discovered the embezzlement? Please." "It's the truth," Josie insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "He framed me. Perhaps, perhaps not." Blackwood straightened, his eyes again raking the shop, absorbing the dusty shelves, mismatched furniture, and faded wallpaper. "Regardless, the funds are missing, and you're the prime suspect. So, let's try again. Where is it?" Josie remained mute, jaw tight. She knew what that money signified: years of swindled lives and broken trust. She'd rather face damnation than lead him to it. Blackwood sighed theatrically. the gesture incongruous in the cluttered confines. "You're being terribly difficult, Josie, for both of us." He produced a slim silver case from his pocket and offered her a cigarette. She declined with a shake of her head. "I hear you've carved out a new little life here," Blackwood continued, carefully lighting a cigarette and inhaling deeply. "A quaint shop, a folksy sheriff, a clean slate." He blew out a plume of smoke, his eyes fixed on her. "Such a pity if something were to upset the apple cart." A chill snaked down Josie's spine. This was no longer just about the missing cash. This was about redemption, about Brody. "What are you implying?" she whispered, her voice strained. Blackwood's smile widened, a cruel, predatory curve that churned her stomach. "Let's just say that people are remarkably vulnerable. An accidental fire, perhaps. A tragic mishap. In a sleepy town like this, things can go wrong with alarming ease. Especially when secrets are being kept." He took another drag, letting the smoke wreath his face like a dark halo. "Tell me where the money is, Josie, and all of this can be avoided. You retain your newfound existence, your charming little enterprise, your sheriff. Everyone walks away unscathed. But if you persist in this stubbornness—" He let the threat linger, palpable in the air. Josie stared at him, her mind racing. Blackwood wasn't posturing. He was a wolf, circling, poised to pounce. She had drawn this danger to redemption, to the people she had grown to cherish. The weight of that knowledge was suffocating. She started, then faltered, her voice catching. She couldn't betray Brody, or Eli, or any of the decent souls in this town. But could she stand idly by while Blackwood dismantled their lives? Blackwood observed her, his gaze glacial. "Time is slipping away, Josie. Choose wisely." He tapped ash from his cigarette into a kitschy glass ashtray, shaped like a kitten. The incongruity of the gesture only emphasized his chilling detachment. Josie shut her eyes, her chest constricting with dread and helplessness. The cost of silence was too steep, but the cost of speaking could be even greater. When she opened her eyes, a newfound resolve hardened her gaze. She would safeguard Dad. Redemption, even if it meant sacrificing everything. "I need time," she said, her voice firm despite the tremble in her hands. "I need to consider my options." Blackwood's smile broadened, devoid of warmth. "Very well, Josie. I possess patience. But don't test it. Some fractures are irreparable." He turned and headed towards the exit, the bell above the door jangling again as he stepped back into the sunlight. Josie remained rooted behind the counter, her legs unsteady, watching him vanish down the street. The cheerful peal of the bell now echoed like a somber dirge, tolling the loss of innocence and redemption. The price of silence had been quoted, and Josie knew she couldn't afford it. But how could she possibly navigate this nightmare without obliterating everything she held dear? Uncertain truths whined, sharp as a honed blade, lashed at Brody as he swung down from the saddle before the sheriff's office. The sense of horse sweat and trail dust clung to him, a stark contrast to the ever-present tang of day-old coffee permeating the building's aged wood. He'd driven his old mount hard from Tucson, a knot of unease twisting in his stomach. Inside, a solitary desk lamp carved a stark island of light from the gloom, where Deputy Miller wrestled with a crossword, brow creased in concentration. "Anything stirring while I was gone, Miller?" Brody's voice, gravelly from the ride, cut through the quiet. Miller jolted, looking up. "Sheriff, didn't hear you. Just Mrs. Henderson's cat. Same tree as always. And some youngsters lighting firecrackers down by the creek." Brody grunted, already heading toward his inner sanctum. He needed to distill the intel Hank had provided. His academy buddy, now buried deep in Phoenix's criminal underbelly, had confirmed Brody's grim suspicions. Josie's brother Frankie wasn't just a petty hustler. He was entangled with the Rossi crime family, associating with predators. And he'd vanished 6 months prior, leaving behind a mire of debts and rumors of pilfered cash. The promised file was still a day out, but Hank's words had already set Brody's nerves on edge. He settled into his worn leather chair, the springs emitting a weary groan. Running a calloused hand over his bristled jaw, he wrestled with the implications. Frankie. He'd sensed Josie was fleeing something, but this the Rossi family didn't forgive or forget. They were patient, implacable. If Josie was even peripherally connected, she was in grave peril. And so was redemption. His gaze drifted to the faded photograph on his desk. His father, a man of unwavering principle, his eyes holding a steely resolve. What would his father have done? Upheld the law, regardless of the personal cost. But the law felt malleable now. Josie had shifted his perspective. He wasn't sure he could simply deliver her, not without understanding the full picture. He rose abruptly, the chair screeching against the floorboards. He needed to see her, to read her. But what would he say? How could he broach this devastating revelation without shattering the fragile trust they'd built? He strode out of the office, offering a clipped nod to Miller, who was now humming contentedly as he completed another square. The wind had intensified, carrying the metallic scent of impending rain. The street lay deserted, shop windows like vacant eyes staring into the night. He quickened his pace toward Josie's apartment above the bakery. The narrow staircase groaned beneath his weight as he ascended. He paused outside her door, his hand hovering. He could still retreat, feign ignorance. But the thought felt cowardly. He had to know the truth, no matter how agonizing. He rapped sharply. The door yielded, revealing Josie, her complexion ashen, her eyes wide with a haunted expression. She wore a simple dress, her hair confined in a loose plait. She looked vulnerable, almost breakable. "Prouty," she breathed, her voice a mere whisper. He crossed the threshold, his gaze sweeping the small space. It was impeccably kept. Small touches, wild flowers in a vase. A well-worn copy of Wuthering Heights, lending it an aura of domesticity. But the warmth couldn't dispel the palpable chill emanating from Josie. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. She avoided his gaze, pivoting towards the window. "I'm fine," she insisted, her voice strained and unconvincing. He knew she was lying, could see it in the slump of her shoulders, the subtle tremor in her hands. "Josie, what is it?" She remained silent, her gaze fixed on the gathering darkness. He moved closer, gently placing a hand on her arm. She flinched but didn't pull away. "Josie, tell me what happened." She inhaled deeply, as if summoning a reservoir of courage. "Someone visited me today," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Who?" She hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "Silas Blackwood." Brody's blood turned to ice. Blackwood. He recognized the name with dread. A fixer, a problem solver. The Rossi family's preferred method of making complications disappear. "What did he want?" Brody asked, his voice taut with apprehension. He knows about Frankie," she choked out, the words barely audible. "He knows everything." Brody's fingers tightened on her arm, a subconscious reaction. "What did he say?" He said Frankie took something that wasn't his to take. He said if I don't reveal its location, people will suffer." Her voice dissolved into sobs, her body convulsing with raw emotion. He drew her close, enfolding her in his embrace. He could feel her shaking, her pulse hammering against his chest. He was at a loss for words, paralyzed by conflicting emotions. Torn between duty and affection, between the dictates of the law and the yearnings of his heart. "It'll be all right," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I won't let anything happen to you." But even as the promise escaped his lips, he knew it was a vow he might be powerless to fulfill. The Rossi family possessed immense power, their cruelty boundless. And Silas Blackwood was an insidious threat. He couldn't fathom the true extent of Josie's predicament, nor could he foresee the lengths he was willing to go to shield her. The rain commenced its relentless drumming against the window, a mournful cadence mirroring the turmoil in his soul. He gazed down at Josie, her face buried against him, her body racked with sobs. With a bone-chilling certainty, he understood that his life, his town, everything he cherished, had been irrevocably altered. He had unwittingly stepped into an abyss, a darkness that threatened to engulf them all. A desperate gamble. The setting sun painted the western sky in hues of blood orange, stretching elongated, gaunt shadows from the riverside cottonwoods. Blackwood's return felt inevitable, a knot twisting in Brody's stomach. a phantom itch under his skin. The man wasn't one for empty pronouncements. His threat was a promise of a storm about to break over redemption. Brody found Ben Carter at his desk, meticulously cleaning his rifle. The scrape of steel against steel punctuated the heavy quiet that had enveloped the sheriff's office, a counterpoint to the sheriff's inner turmoil. "Ben," Brody began, his voice hushed. "Got to talk." Carter looked up, his youthful features full of anticipation. "Sheriff? What's going on?" Brody motioned toward the coffee. "Pour some, then lend an ear." He laid out the situation. Frankie Lane's vanishing act, the Rossi family's fingers in it, Blackwood's menacing visit emitting only the fledgling feelings he harbored for Josie. No need to complicate things for the kid. As he listened, the deputy's eager expression gradually morphed into a stark awareness of the danger. "So, you reckon this Blackwood's coming back?" Ben rubbed a hand through his already tousled hair. "He's a certainty, and he won't be riding alone." Brody leaned against his desk, the aged wood protesting with a creak. "We need to be prepared." "How, Sheriff?" A tremor of unease laced Ben's tone. "We lay a trap." The scheme was straightforward, bordering on ruthless, designed to capitalize on Blackwood's hubris. They would present redemption as exposed, a tempting prize. Brody would project the image of a lone lawman, spread thin and outgunned. The ambush would be set at the old mill on the town's periphery, a locale familiar with underhanded dealings. "Risky, Sheriff," Ben said, his brow furrowed. "What if he brings more guns than we can handle?" "Then we stand our ground," Brody replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "This town's worth defending, Ben." At the general store, he sought out Eli Miller. As usual, Eli was positioned behind the counter, polishing his spectacles and gleaning snippets of conversation between two ranchers haggling over cattle prices. The bell chimed as Brody entered. "Sheriff," Eli greeted him, a spark of knowing in his eyes. "Doubt this is a friendly visit." Brody nodded grimly. "I need your help, Eli, and absolute discretion." He recounted the situation, omitting the details about Josie, but emphasizing the peril facing redemption. Eli absorbed every word, his expression darkening. "That Rossi crew," Eli muttered, shaking his head slowly. "They're a creeping vine, choking everything." "Exactly," Brody said. "That's why we stop them here, before they can set roots." "What do you need me to do?" Eli's voice was firm. Brody outlined his plan. Eli needed to cultivate the impression subtly. Of course, that the sheriff was overmatched, that redemption was ripe for exploitation. He needed Eli to embody the worried citizen, bemoaning the town's depleted resources and the sheriff's inability to control the situation. "You want me to stir the pot?" Eli asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I need you to be believable," Brody corrected. "The town's future might hang on it." Eli nodded, his levity vanishing. "All right, Sheriff, I'm in, but watch your back. This Blackwood sounds like bad news." As twilight deepened, Brody and Ben prepared the ambush. The old mill stood in silent disrepair, its gears frozen by rust and neglect. They arranged themselves strategically, using the shadows and the dilapidated structure as cover. Ben, though clearly anxious, was efficient and attentive, executing Brody's instructions with unwavering resolve. "Remember, Ben," Brody murmured, his voice barely audible. "Wait for my signal, no exceptions." Ben nodded, his eyes wide and watchful. "Understood, Sheriff." Brody checked his rifle, ensuring its smooth operation and loaded chamber. He mentally rehearsed the plan, anticipating every potential development. He knew this was a long shot, a desperate gamble to safeguard Josie and the community he'd sworn to protect. But he was willing to risk everything. He pictured Josie, her resilient spirit, and the vulnerability he sensed beneath her tough facade. He couldn't let Blackwood harm her. He wouldn't let the Rossi family poison redemption. The moon ascended in the sky, bathing the land in an eerie light. The air hung still and heavy, thick with anticipation. He heard the distant cry of a coyote, a solitary sound mirroring the disquiet in his soul. He waited. The hours stretched, each moment an eternity. Then fidgeted, his hand hovering near his sidearm. Brody remained motionless, his senses sharpened, straining for any sign of Blackwood's approach. Finally, in the distance, he detected it. The faint cadence of approaching horses, the complaint of wagon wheels. They were coming. Brody tightened his grip on his rifle, his knuckles bone white. He inhaled deeply, fighting to control the turmoil within. He was ready. The riders drew nearer, their shapes becoming distinct against the moonlit horizon. Brody counted 4 figures, Blackwood in the lead. They approached the mill warily, their eyes darting through the shadows. Blackwood halted his horse, his gaze fixed on the crumbling structure. "Sheriff!" he bellowed, his voice shattering the night silence. "Come out! We know you're in there!" Brody remained concealed, his finger resting on the trigger. He waited for Blackwood to expose himself, to commit. Blackwood dismounted, drawing his pistol. "Fine by me, Sheriff," he said, his voice turning harsh. He signaled to his men, and they began to fan out, surrounding the mill. This was it. Brody drew a deep breath and emerged from the shadows, rifle raised. "Hold it right there, Blackwood," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. Blackwood froze, a cruel smirk spreading across his features. "Well, well, Sheriff," he said. "Wondered when you'd finally show." "This ends here, Blackwood," Brody stated, his voice unwavering. "Turn around and leave redemption. Now." Blackwood's smirk widened into a laugh. You think you can stop us, Sheriff? You're just a lone wolf." "I'm all the law you're going to find," Brody retorted, his grip tightening on his rifle. Tension crackled in the air, thick and suffocating. The fate of redemption teetered on the edge, resting on the shoulders of its weary protector, and the desperate gamble he was about to take. Siege of redemption, the morning stillness fractured with the sharp report of a rifle. Not the rhythmic clang of the mill, but a violent eruption from Main Street, sending pigeons spiraling skyward and spiderwebbing the glass of Mrs. Abernathy's mercantile. Brody cursed, spitting grit, as he flung himself behind a meager barricade of decaying timber. Ambush. Blackwood, it seemed, favored mayhem over predictability. "Ben! Down!" he bellowed, aghast at the sight of his deputy, a statue of naivete, planted squarely in the road. A second bullet whined off the hitching post, inches from Ben's head. He yelped, a startled cry, and scrambled for the sheriff's dubious sanctuary. "Sheriff, what in God's name?" His face was the color of bleached bone. "What's happening?" "Blackwood's declared outright war on redemption, that's what. Get to the church. Help the women and children fortify it. And Ben," a steel edge sharpened Brody's tone, "anyone tries to breach those doors, you shoot." Ben swallowed, the bitter draft of reality choking his youthful idealism. A curt nod, his hand instinctively finding the reassuring weight of his sidearm. He bolted, hugging the ground, vanishing into the dust-laden air. Brody risked a glance. Blackwood's men, a dozen at least, were arrayed along Main Street, unleashing a storm of lead. They descended like wolves, taking the town utterly unawares. There, in front of the saloon, stood Silas Blackwood himself, a malevolent calm radiating from him as he cradled a shotgun, his gaze, cold as glacial ice, sweeping the devastation. "Looking for something, Silas?" Brody shouted, shouldering his rifle. Blackwood's head jerked up. A cruel smile, a predator's baring of teeth, spread across his face. "Hayes, thought you'd be burrowing like a prairie dog by now." The shotgun rose, an inexorable movement. Brody squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard. He saw Blackwood stumble as the bullet unearthed a geyser of dirt at his feet, a near miss. Those precious seconds bought Brody a chance. He lunged sideways, finding scant protection behind a water trough. The air was thick with the metallic tang of gunpowder and the piercing cries of townsfolk seized by terror. A woman's scream, abruptly cut short as she was dragged into the bakery. A dog's mournful howl, silenced forever in the street. Redemption's idyllic veneer was peeling away, revealing the brutal wood beneath. From the vantage point of the general store, Eli Miller leveled his ancient hunting rifle. He'd witnessed enough brutality to foresee the coming storm, and he refused to stand idly by while these thugs desecrated his home. He squeezed the trigger, targeting the nearest attacker. The man staggered, clutching his arm, a guttural sound escaping his lips. "That's for Mrs. Abernathy's window, you polecat," Eli growled, reloading with the practiced ease of long habit. The fusillade intensified. Brody knew a direct confrontation was suicide. He needed to divert them, buy the town a chance to breathe, to organize. He unleashed a barrage of shots, keeping Blackwood pinned, then seized the moment to sprint toward the shadowed maw of the alley behind the saloon. He moved with desperate speed, adrenaline searing through his veins. The shouts of Blackwood's men echoed, their heavy footfalls a drumbeat on the wooden planks as they gave chase. Vaulting over a haphazard pile of barrels, he landed jarringly on the far side. He burst onto a narrow track that snaked toward the open plains. Blackwood would follow. He was banking on it. Josie, the name a silent prayer, his heart a clenched fist. He had to safeguard her. He had to safeguard them all. Blackwood's voice, amplified by the sudden lull in the clamor, reverberated behind him. "Running, Sheriff? Where do you think you can disappear to?" Brody offered no reply, his legs pumping, his gaze flitting across the terrain, seeking any advantage the land might offer. Reaching the town's edge, the fields unfolded before him, a vast and unforgiving tapestry. He whirled, confronting his pursuers. Blackwood emerged from the alley, rage contorting his features. His thugs spread out behind him, their weapons leveled. "Nowhere to run, Hayes." Blackwood's voice dripped venom. "Just tell me where she is. Where's Josie hiding?" "She's under my protection," Brody declared, his voice unwavering. "And you won't lay a finger on her." Blackwood emitted a harsh, grating laugh, devoid of humor. "You? Protect her? You're a flea-bitten sheriff in a two-bit town. You haven't got a clue what you're up against." "I know exactly what I'm up against," Brody retorted, his eyes hardening into chips of flint. "A pack of jackals who think they can invade my town and do as they please." "This ain't your town any longer, Sheriff," Blackwood snarled. "This is Rossi territory now." Brody lifted his rifle, its barrel aimed squarely at Blackwood's chest. "Not while I draw breath." The standoff stretched, taut with unspoken menace. The only sound was the sigh of the wind, whispering through the dry grasses. Abruptly, Blackwood gave a sharp nod. "Kill him," he commanded. The word clipped and final. The air exploded. Bullets tore at the earth around Brody, whining past his ears. He weaved and dodged, returning fire with a desperate fervor. He knew a head-on confrontation was a death sentence. He had to rely on his wits, his familiarity with the land. Retreating, he lured Blackwood and his posse further into the fields. He knew of an abandoned mine shaft, a yawning chasm concealed amongst a thicket of weeds, a few hundred yards distant. A desperate gamble, but his sole hope. He sprinted, lungs ablaze, muscles screaming in protest. The shouts of his pursuers, their thundering footfalls, echoed close behind. A fleeting glint showed Blackwood's grim visage closing the gap. He reached the mine shaft, a gaping void camouflaged by overgrown foliage. He didn't hesitate. He leaped, landing hard on the loose shale at the perimeter of the shaft. Scrambling down the precipitous slope, he vanished into the inky blackness. Blackwood and his men reached a precipice. They peered into the abyss, confusion clouding their faces. "He went down there?" one of them questioned, his voice tinged with disbelief. "That's madness." Blackwood advanced, his eyes narrowing into slits. "He's not crazy. He's desperate. Desperation makes fools of men." He paused, a slow, predatory smile creeping across his lips. "But it also makes them predictable." He motioned to two of his men. "Go down there. Finish it." The pair exchanged uneasy glances. The prospect of descending into the mine's dark, unknown depths held no appeal. But defying Blackwood was a far more perilous proposition. Reluctantly, they began their descent into the darkness, their footsteps echoing eerily in the suffocating silence. Blackwood turned his attention back toward town. The distant echoes of gunfire still punctuated the air. The siege of Ruhr. Redemption had begun. and it was far from resolution. Beyond the needle, the blast's residue still vibrated in Josie's bones as she bolted from the boarding house. Brody gone. Swallowed by the gaping maw of the abandoned mine. Her heart formed a frantic tattoo against her ribs, a caged hummingbird desperate for escape. Fear grappled with a fierce, incandescent anger. Blackwood. He would answer for this. Ignoring Mrs. Gable's desperate cries to remain indoors, Josie surveyed the pandemonium. Townsfolk, armed with hunting rifles and makeshift weaponry, cowered behind overturned wagons and hastily erected barriers. Blackwood's men, a motley crew of hardened thugs in gleaming steel, pressed their assault with brutal efficiency. The air stung with gunfire and the sharp tang of burnt powder. She noticed Caleb, the blacksmith, struggling to reload, his face ashen with dread. A young boy, barely 10, huddled beside him, clutching his ear and whimpering. This was no longer about Brody's fate. It was about their own. Josie's gaze landed on a forgotten cache of rifles leaning against the general store wall. The hunting club's arsenal, usually reserved for deer and rabbits, now represented the only hope. Without a second thought, she sprinted towards them, the gravel grinding beneath her boots. A bullet whizzed past, spitting dust, unfazed, her focus honed to a razor's edge. She reached the rifles, seizing the first one at hand. A Winchester lever action, its stock worn smooth by time. It felt surprisingly substantial, yet eerily familiar. Working the lever to chamber a round, unwelcome. Memories flooded her mind. Marco, her brother, teaching her to shoot on their grandfather's farm, the earthy scent of the fields, the satisfying recoil against her shoulder. A life she thought she'd buried long ago. "You shouldn't be out here, Miss Lane," Caleb yelled, his voice strained with urgency. "Get back inside." Josie disregarded him. "Cover me," she shouted, leveling the rifle at one of Blackwood's men aiming at Caleb. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, a jolt of power surging through her arm. The attacker staggered, clutching his chest, and collapsed. Caleb gaped at her, speechless. "Where did you learn that?" "Doesn't matter," Josie said, her voice clipped. "Just keep firing." Together, they formed a makeshift line of defense, their combined fire slowing Blackwood's advance. Josie moved with chilling efficiency, reloading with practiced ease, her gaze sweeping the fray. She was no longer Josie Lane, the seamstress. She was a guardian, fighting for survival, for the town that had somehow become her sanctuary. The initial shock of Blackwood's offensive ebbed, replaced by grim resolve. The townsfolk, galvanized by Josie's courage, fought with renewed desperation. Each shot precise, each life precious. Abruptly, a figure detached itself from the shadows, moving with unexpected swiftness. Blackwood himself. Face twisted with rage, eyes blazing with icy venom. He brandished a sawed-off shotgun, a weapon of brutal, close-range destruction. "Josie!" he bellowed, his voice slicing through the chaos. "Come out and face me." Josie knew this was the culmination. The moment of reckoning she'd dreaded. The confrontation she'd tried to evade. She would not yield. Not now. She turned to Caleb. "Cover me," she repeated, her voice unwavering. "I'm going after him." Caleb's eyes widened in alarm. "Are you mad? He'll kill you." "Maybe," Josie said, a ghost of a smile gracing her lips. "But I'm going to make him earn it." She stepped from behind the barricade, walking slowly, purposefully, towards Blackwood. The air crackled with anticipation. Every eye was riveted upon them. "I've been waiting for you, Josie," Blackwood hissed, his voice a low growl. "And I've been waiting for you, Silas." Josie countered, her grip tightening on the rifle. Before Blackwood could react, Josie raised her rifle and fired. The bullet slammed into his shoulder, sending him reeling. He roared in agony and rage, raising his shotgun. But Josie was already in motion. She threw herself to the side, narrowly escaping the blast. The shotgun pellets tore through the air where she had been, ripping splinters from the wooden wall. She scrambled down, upright, adrenaline coursing through her. Blackwood was reloading, his face a grotesque mask of fury. This was it. Win or lose. Suddenly, A figure erupted from the alley beside the general store. Brody. He moved with savage grace. A whirlwind of fists and fury Josie had never witnessed. He collided with Blackwood, felling him. The shotgun skittered from Blackwood's grasp across the dusty street. Brody didn't relent. He unleashed a torrent of blows upon Blackwood's face, each strike fueled by rage and a fierce protectiveness of Josie. Josie watched, stunned, her rifle forgotten. She had never seen this side of Brody, this primal rage. Finally, Brody halted, chest heaving, knuckles bloodied and raw. Blackwood lay prone, his face a pulpy ruin. Brody turned to Josie, eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "Josie, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky. "But you?" "I'm all right," Brody rasped, his voice rough. "Just a little the worse for wear." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the unwavering resolve in her eyes, the strength in her posture. He saw a woman transformed, a woman capable of anything. He had tried to shield her, to keep her from harm. But he understood now that Josie needed no such protection. She was a warrior, like him. And together, they would confront whatever lay ahead. The battle raged on. Blackwood's men remained a threat. But something fundamental had changed. The scales had tipped. Redemption was no longer a town teetering on the edge. It was a town, standing its ground, ready to fight. And Josie Lane, the woman with the veiled past, was leading the charge. Hostage. The air stank of cordite and charred timbers. Redemption had dissolved into bedlam with shocking speed, driven by a singular purpose. Brody became a force of nature aimed at Silas Blackwood. Seeing Josie's grit as she battled alongside the townsfolk ignited a fierce protectiveness within him. Yet, the tumult formed a heavy curtain, concealing perils he couldn't foresee. One heartbeat, Josie was at his side, disarming a thug with blinding speed. The next, she vanished. A cold fist clenched around Brody's heart. His eyes darted across the block. Ravaged street, the scattered debris, the huddled townsfolk seeking shelter. "Josie!" he roared, his voice swallowed by the cacophony. Then he spotted him. Blackwood, a viper slithering through the chaos, hauling Josie toward the shadowy gap between the saloon and the mercantile. Blackwood's expression was a frozen lake of calculation, a cruel smile twitching at his lips. Brody felt his veins turn to ice. He exploded into motion, shouldering past anyone in his way, cold peacemaker leveled. "Blackwood! Release her!" Blackwood never paused. Reaching the alley, he slammed Josie against the brick wall. She fought back, her eyes blazing, but Blackwood's grip was unyielding. "Sheriff Hayes," Blackwood drawled, his voice deceptively light. "How good of you to grace us. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." He pressed the honed edge of a bowie knife to Josie's throat, a crimson bead blooming. Instantly, Brody locked up. Every nerve screamed for him to attack, to rip Blackwood apart. But he couldn't risk it. A single misstep, and Josie was dead. "What do you want, Blackwood?" Brody's voice was a raspy thread. He lowered his weapon slightly, a reluctant concession. "What I desire is simplicity itself, Sheriff. I want what belongs to me by right." Blackwood's eyes gleamed in the dimness. "I understand a certain remuneration, belonging to my associates, has gone astray, and I suspect your lovely companion possesses knowledge of its whereabouts." Josie spat full in Blackwood's face. "Rotten hell, Silas." Blackwood chuckled, wiping the saliva from his cheek. He increased the pressure of the blade, and Josie flinched. Such fire, a pity to extinguish it. A wave of pure, untamed fury washed over Brody. "Lay a hand on her, Blackwood, and I swear, swear your oaths, Sheriff. But time bleeds away. Reveal the money's location, and she might live. Refuse, and you can envision the result." The weight of the choice nearly buckled Brody's knees. He knew nothing of any stolen funds. Josie had confided nothing, and he hadn't pressed. He had given her his trust. Now, that trust threatened to become her death sentence. He scanned desperately, searching for an advantage, a glimmer of rescue. But the alley remained desolate. the sounds of the firefight muffled by the thick walls. He stood alone. "I haven't a clue what you're talking about, Blackwood." Brody's voice was a dangerous murmur. "I know nothing about any money." Blackwood's smile broadened, devoid of any warmth. "Liar. She didn't arrive in this backwater for the scenery. And I know she's tied to my brother. Where is it, Sheriff? Where's my brother's loot?" Brody's fists clenched tight, bone grinding on bone. He'd sensed Josie was running, but never imagined this scale. Organized crime, purloined wealth, a heartless killer holding her hostage, a waking nightmare. He needed to buy her time. He had to strategize. "Even if I did," Brody hedged, "why would I tell you anything? You'd murder us both regardless." "Perhaps," Blackwood conceded. "Or perhaps not. I value expediency, Sheriff. If I procure what I seek, quickly and without difficulty, there need be no excess fatalities." Brody didn't believe it for an instant, but he had to play the game. "Give me your solemn promise that you'll release her if I reveal the hiding place." Blackwood erupted with a harsh, grating laugh. "My word? You dare ask for my word? You possess even less sophistication than I credited, Sheriff." "Then this discussion ends here," Brody stated, his voice hardening. He raised his gun marginally, training it directly on Blackwood's skull. "Release her, Blackwood. This doesn't necessitate this outcome." Blackwood's eyes narrowed to slits. He recognized the determination etched on Brody's face. He knew Brody wouldn't hesitate to fire. But he also held the ultimate advantage. "You harbor feelings for her, don't you, Sheriff?" Blackwood's voice dripped with venom. "That is your failing, and it will ensure her demise." He tightened his hold on Josie, eliciting a suppressed gasp of agony. The line of blood on her throat deepened, a stark testament to her peril. "Don't do this, Blackwood," Brody implored, his voice fracturing. "Please, she has done you no wrong. Her connection to my brother and his assets implicates her, Sheriff. That renders her a participant, and participants must atone." Blackwood's eyes flickered with predatory glee. "One final opportunity, Sheriff. Where is the money?" Brody gazed at Josie, her eyes locked on his, silently begging him to act. He saw the fear mirrored there, but also the unwavering spirit that had drawn him to her from the start. He couldn't fail her. He wouldn't. "Fine, Blackwood." Brody relented, his voice barely audible. "Fine. I'll tell you where it is." The mine shaft showdown the truck. A clattering metal beast clawed its way up the rutted track, each upward surge a painful jab at Brody's bound wrists. Silas Blackwood, a cruel satisfaction etched on his features, watched him from the passenger seat, sunlight catching the menacing gleam of his revolver. Josie's whereabouts remained a mystery, presumed captive in the truck's rear. "Almost there, Sheriff," Silas rasped, his voice like sandpaper. "You weren't spinning tales about this location, were you?" Brody only grunted, the gritty taste of dread coating his tongue. He hadn't outright lied, precisely. He was leading Silas to the long-abandoned Blackwood mine, a place Brody envisioned as Blackwood's final stop. Earlier, while Silas was occupied, he'd managed a whispered message to Ben, his trusted deputy. Ben, loyal to a fault, would be waiting. The track ended at the mine's maw, the jagged wound in the hillside. Decades of oblivion had ravaged the place. Timbers rotted, the entrance slumped inward, and the air hung thick with the aroma of wet earth and dissolution. A fitting stage for a final reckoning. Silas shoved Brody out of the vehicle, the brutal motion nearly toppling him. He landed awkwardly, his joints screaming in protest. "Lead on," Silas commanded, brandishing the revolver. "And dispense with any cleverness. Josie's fate hangs in the balance." Brody hauled himself upright, every fiber in his body aching. He risked a glance back at the truck. Josie's shape was just discernible through the darkened windows. He had to tread carefully. He started toward the mine entrance, the crunch of loose stone underfoot amplified in the sudden hush. Silas shadowed him, his presence an oppressive weight on Brody's shoulders. Inside, the darkness was absolute, a heavy shroud that devoured the light. Brody faltered, his hand finding the clammy cold rock of the mine wall. He knew this mine like the map of his own palm. He'd explored its depths as a boy, when spooking bats was his chief concern. "Mind yourself, Sheriff," Silas's voice echoed, unsettling in the close confines. Wouldn't want you to suffer an unfortunate accident. Brody pressed onward, deeper into the earth. He knew the labyrinthine passages, the hidden niches, the treacherous precipices. He'd selected this site deliberately, knowing it offered the best opportunity to turn the tables. He reached the main shaft, a vast chamber where miners had once toiled. Now, it was a silent sepulchre, filled with shadows and whispers of dreams long since buried. "This is it," Brody stated, his voice bouncing off the cavern walls. "The money's here." Silas advanced, his gaze sweeping the area, suspicion etched on his face. "Where?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Brody gestured toward a section of the wall, a chaotic jumble of loose stone and decaying beams. "Hidden behind there. They sealed it off after the incident." Silas hesitated, his eyes darting between Brody and the indicated wall. He plainly distrusted the sheriff, but the siren song of the money was too potent to ignore. "All right," he conceded, his tone tight with suspicion. "Start clearing those rocks." Brody bent, feigning exertion, his muscles screaming. He was buying time, praying for Ben's arrival. Suddenly, a voice thundered from the gloom. "Silas Blackwood, Sheriff Hayes, drop your weapon. Surrender now." Silas whirled, surprise stark in his eyes. This was not part of the plan. From the shadows, Ben Carter emerged, rifle raised, his face drawn but resolute. He looked far too young for this, but Brody knew Ben possessed the heart of a lion. "Ben, get back," Brody shouted, knowing the deputy was walking into a viper's nest. Silas recovered with chilling speed, his eyes hardening. He seized Josie, who had been concealed in the truck all along, and yanked her toward him. She struggled, but he held her fast, pressing the revolver against her temple. "Another step, Sheriff." "And..." She draws her last breath. Silas snarled, his voice vibrating with menace, then froze, his rifle wavering precariously. Brody felt a wave of rage wash over him, hot and primal. He'd walked directly into Silas's snare. "Release her." "Silas," Brody commanded, his voice low and gravelly. "This doesn't have to end this way." It already has, Sheriff," Silas countered, his grip tightening on Josie. "Now, tell me where the money is, or she pays the ultimate price." Brody locked eyes with Silas, his mind racing, searching for a solution. He had to protect Josie, safeguard Ben, and bring this nightmare to an end. "The money's not here, Silas," Brody stated, his voice unwavering. "It never was." Silas's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're lying through your teeth." "No," Brody said. "I led you here because I knew you'd follow. Because I knew this is where it would ultimately conclude." He took a deliberate step forward, ignoring Ben's desperate warning. "Let her go, Silas," he repeated, his voice a steady pulse. "It's finished. It's finished." Silas hesitated, his eyes flickering between Brody and Josie, assessing his dwindling options. He was kinda cornered, outplayed. "You believe you've triumphed, Sheriff?" he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "This is only the prologue." With a sudden, violent shove, Silas propelled Josie toward Brody and fired. The gunshot ripped through the mine, deafening and terrifying. Josie cried out, stumbling forward. Brody lunged forward, catching her in his arms, instinctively shielding her from Silas. Ben reacted instantly, squeezing the trigger of his rifle. Silas staggered backward, clutching at his chest, disbelief twisting his features. Brody gently lowered Josie to the ground, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned his attention to Silas, his face grim as stone. Silas stood for a heartbeat, swaying precariously, then crumpled to the ground, the revolver skittering beside him. Silence descended upon the cavern, broken only by Josie's ragged breaths. Brody knelt beside her, his hands trembling. "Josie, are you injured?" She gave a weak nod, clutching at her shoulder. "I'm all right," she whispered, her voice laced with pain and fear. "Just frightened." Brody glanced up at Ben, who remained frozen, rifle still raised. The young deputy looked moments away from vomiting. Then, "Call it in," Brody said, his voice rough. "Tell them we need an ambulance. Immediately." then nodded mutely, his face still ashen, and fumbled for his radio. Brody focused his attention back on Josie, his heart heavy. He'd saved her life, but at what cost? He looked at Silas's lifeless form sprawled on the cave floor, and knew that redemption would never be the same. He had chosen Josie, and in that act, had irrevocably crossed a boundary. He would have to carry the weight of that choice for the rest of his days. Redemption's savior, the chill, sharper than any blade, bored into Josie's marrow as she sprawled on the cold earth of the mine, the gunshot's echo still a painful phantom in her head. Silas's bullet had carved a burning path through her side, a torment that threatened to drown her. Yet, beneath the waves of agony, a fierce ember glowed. She refused to die in this forsaken place. Not like this. The coarse ropes binding her wrists felt like razors against her skin as she fought against them. An expert had tied the knot, cinching it tight, but no one accounted for the raw strength born of desperation. A jolt of adrenaline coursed through her. She writhed and strained, the rope imprinting its harsh texture into her flesh. Finally, a thread gave way, then another. Enough slack appeared for her to wriggle a hand free. Ignoring the throbbing fire in her flank, she grappled with the remaining knot, her fingers clumsy and unresponsive. Once liberated, she tore a strip from her already tattered shirt, staunching the flow of blood from the wound. Pain served as a constant, unwelcome companion, yet it also stoked her will. Two of Silas's men, dark sentinels against the last vestiges of daylight, guarded the mine entrance. Their attention remained fixed on the sounds of the raging conflict outside, blissfully unaware of her predicament. Josie knew opportunity knocked but once. She melted into the shadows, her boots whispering secrets on the loose stone. Reaching a jumble of discarded tools, she seized a hefty iron bar, its weight a solid promise in her grasp. Her pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Approaching the unaware guards, she noticed one pivot slightly, as though catching a whiff of her presence. She surged forward, the iron bar arcing down towards the base of his skull. He crumpled, a silent heap on the ground. The other guard spun, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. He fumbled for his weapon, but Josie was quicker. A swift kick sent the gun skittering across the ground, followed by the full force of the iron bar impacting his abdomen. He doubled over, struggling for breath. Snatching the dropped pistol, her hands trembled momentarily. She wasn't made for this, but survival demanded it. Leveling the weapon at the incapacitated guard, she demanded in a low, dangerous voice, "Where's Brody?" Gasping, the guard could only choke out, "Up ahead. Silas has him." Ignoring the searing protest of her wound, Josie sprinted towards the mine's mouth, the pistol a cold extension of her will. The sounds of battle grew louder, the air acrid with the metallic tang of gunpowder. She burst into the open, to the sight of Brody locked in a desperate struggle with Silas at the edge of a yawning chasm. "Josie!" Brody shouted, astonishment etched on his face. Silas, caught off guard, stumbled backward. Brody exploited the lapse, shoving him towards the brink. Silas flailed, his features twisted in a grotesque parody of rage and terror. "You can't win, Brody," he snarled. "The Rossies will bleed this town dry." "Not on my watch," Brody replied, his voice edged with steel. Then materialized, rifle raised. "Sheriff, stand aside." Before Brody could react, Ben discharged the weapon. The bullet slammed into Silas's chest, pitching him over the edge of the precipice. His scream, a brief, piercing note of despair, vanished into the abyss below. A heavy silence descended. Brody stared at the spot where Silas had disappeared, his face a tableau of exhaustion and regret. He turned to Josie, relief flooding his features. "Josie, are you hurt badly?" he asked, rushing towards her. "I'll mend," she replied, wincing as he examined her wound. "What about you? What happened here?" Brody sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. Silas knew about your brother. He knew everything." "My brother?" Josie's eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening her gaze. "What does Marco have to do with any of this?" "Silas was on the Rossies' payroll," Brody explained. "They're after something Marco lifted, something he thought he could bury here in redemption." The color drained from Josie's face. Marco always did court trouble. He dragged you into this mess, Josie, Brody said, his voice softening with concern. But you're not cut from the same cloth. You never were. He reached out, gently framing her face with his hands. I know you have no ties to the Rossis. I know you're innocent. Josie searched his eyes, seeking any flicker of doubt. All she found was unwavering belief. A tide of emotions surged through her: relief, gratitude, and an unfamiliar warmth that defied definition. How can you be so sure? She asked, her voice barely audible. I've been digging into Marco's affairs for months, Brody said. I know his associates, his debts, and I know you, Josie. I see how you look at this town, how you care for its people. You wouldn't betray them. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Besides, I trust my instincts. They haven't led me astray yet. Ben cleared his throat, disrupting the intimacy of the moment. Sheriff, we need to get Josie patched up, and we need to secure this mine. There could be more of Silas's men lurking about. Brody nodded, his professional mask snapping back into place. You're right, Ben. Let's move. He helped Josie to her feet, his arm a steadying presence around her waist. As they made their way towards the entrance, Josie glanced back at the precipice where Silas had met his end. The darkness seemed to swallow the past, offering a glimmer of a fresh start. But she knew the Rossis wouldn't relinquish their prize so easily. They would come seeking what they coveted, and redemption would find itself caught in the crossfire. She looked at Brody, his expression set with resolve. He was ready to stand against them, to protect his town, to shield her. And she would stand beside him. She owed him that much, perhaps even more. Redemption had given her a second chance, a refuge from her past, and a sense of purpose. Now, it was time to defend it. A new dawn. The gunshot's reverberation lingered, a brutal period concluding Silas's venomous rant. She loomed over his still figure, the beret, firearm a hefty weight in her grip. The scent of burnt powder clinging to the air. The adrenaline's surge ebbed, leaving her drained to the core. Brody, his face a canvas of worry, knelt beside her. You all right? A nod was all Josie could manage, her throat constricted. The recent hours assaulted her mind. Betrayal's sting, the violent struggle, the brush with death. Ben's notifying dispatch. Brody indicated the young deputy, his complexion ashen as he wrestled with his radio. Scene's gotta be secured. The aftermath felt detached from reality. The once immaculate cabin lay ravaged, a tableau of toppled furnishings, fractured glass, and crimson stains. The comforting aroma of pine yielded to the sharp reek of discharged cartridges. Ben, resembling a startled rabbit more than a law officer, meticulously arranged evidence markers. Sheriff? Ben's voice wavered. Dispatch needs confirmation about Silas. And the others involved. Brody sighed, raking a hand through his already ruffled hair. Tell them Silas resisted arrest. The others were accomplices. It was self-defense. Josie observed Ben conveying the fabricated account, his brow furrowed in concentration. Brody was shielding her, manipulating the truth to spare her from the inevitable, harsh spotlight. The burden of that protection pressed down hard. As the sun began its gradual descent, painting long shadows across the valley floor, Brody ushered Josie outside. The invigorating mountain breeze flooded her lungs, a welcome reprieve from the stifling air within the cabin. We need to talk. Brody's tone was grave. They settled onto the porch swing, a heavy silence hanging between them. Josie anticipated the inquisition, the doubts lurking beneath the surface, the unspoken accusations. You were aware he was working for the Rossis, weren't you? Brody finally broke the quiet, his gaze fixed on the distant peaks. Josie offered a hesitant nod, her voice a mere breath. Marco told me. Before everything went sideways. He said Silas was their anchor in redemption, keeping tabs. And what prize are the Rossis monitoring? Josie hesitated, unsure about the extent of her disclosure. Marco, he unearthed something. Something they coveted. He secreted it here, in redemption. Brody pivoted, his eyes probing hers. What exactly is it, Josie? I don't know, she confessed, frustration coloring her tone. Marco never specified. He just assured me it was secure here. Beyond discovery. Secure with Silas? Brody's tone dripped with disbelief. He was ignorant of Silas's allegiance then, Josie clarified. He discovered it later, when it was already too late. Brody remained quiet, lost in thought. Josie could practically see the internal struggle. The conflict between lawman and friend. The Rossis will be coming, he finally stated, his voice laced with foreboding. They won't simply walk away from this. I know, Josie replied, her voice heavy with apprehension. They never do. Then we have to prepare, Brody countered, his eyes hardening with resolve. We must unearth Marco's secret, protect it, and protect each other. He reached for her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. I have faith in you, Josie. Perhaps more than I should, but I do. Josie squeezed his hand, her heart welling with gratitude. Thank you, Brody, for everything you've done. As darkness enveloped Redemption, blanketing the town in shadow, Eli Miller sat on the veranda of his general store, a mug of tepid coffee in his grasp. He watched the flashing lights of the sheriff's vehicles disappear over the ridge, bound for town. Rumors had reached his ears. Whispers of unrest emanating from Silas Blackwood's property. He had noticed the worry lines etched onto Brody Hayes's face, the haunted look in Josie Lane's eyes. Eli understood that Redemption was undergoing a transformation. Gone were the tranquil, predictable days, replaced by a sense of disquiet, an intuition that something sinister was lurking just below the surface. He longed for simpler times, when the biggest worry was a wandering hound or a broken-down fence. Yet, he also accepted change as an unavoidable force, recognizing that even the most secluded towns couldn't elude the long reach of the outside world. He sipped his coffee, the bitter liquid warming his throat. He trusted Brody would do all he could to defend Redemption, to hold back the encroaching darkness. But Eli also understood that Brody couldn't accomplish it alone. He would need assistance, unwavering support, and perhaps a stroke of fortune. The next morning dawned crisp and radiant, the sun daubing the sky with strokes of apricot and gold. Brody leaned against the porch railing of his home, observing Josie as she tended the small flower garden near the steps. The ordinary gesture filled him with a serenity he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. He approached her, enveloping her in his embrace from behind. Ah, morning, he whispered, gently kissing the nape of her neck. Morning, Josie responded, leaning back into him. It's beautiful, isn't it? Brody surveyed the valley, the undulating hills drenched in sunlight. Having spent his entire life in Redemption, he had taken its splendor for granted. But now, witnessing it through Josie's perspective, he savored it anew. It is, he concurred. It's where I belong. Josie turned to face him, her eyes sparkling. It feels like where I belong, she said softly. Brody smiled, gently framing her face with his hands. Then stay, he implored, his voice earnest. Stay here, with me. Let's build a life here, together. Josie's eyes glistened with tears, but her smile shone radiantly. I will, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. I want that more than anything. As the sun ascended higher in the sky, bathing Redemption in its warm glow, Brody and Josie stood hand in hand, witnessing the birth of the new day. The future remained uncertain, the challenges ahead formidable. But they faced it as one, bound together by their affection and their unwavering commitment to safeguard the town they now called home.